Destruction is one of the core features of Battlefield titles, and it's been present in every single title and expansion ever released for the franchise. Back in 2002, with the original title, Battlefield 1942, destruction was fairly limited. You could blow up bridges and vehicles, but beyond that, the maps themselves were fairly static. With the introduction of the Frostbite engine, specifically with Bad Company 1 on the Xbox 360 and the PS3, the franchise took a huge leap forwards. We had full house demolitions, terrain deformation, and the shells of tanks left behind on the battlefield. Fast forward to now, and we have Battlefield 1 with an even more integrated and refined version of what we saw in Bad Company, and something I personally feel fits right into Battlefield 1's gameplay loop. Some people, however, might argue that destruction has gone from being a proper gameplay element to simply a flashy extension of the marketing program, and I'm looking at you, Battlefield 4, and your Levolution system, aimed at selling as many copies as possible. Let's explore the whole destruction idea here today and work through some of these Battlefield games. Before we move forwards though, this video today is sponsored by ASUS and their Cerberus product line of gaming peripherals. This is their entry-level price point for gamers, but they've got some really high performance parts. Now they sent me across a brand new Cerberus GTX 1070 Ti graphics card. That thing's really powerful, and a Cerberus Fortis gaming mouse as well. Both of these are really smart looking pieces of kit. Now, the Fortis mouse has a magnesium alloy base that's almost unheard of for a budget mouse, slides really smoothly across your mouse pad. It's also ambidextrous, so left or right-handed gamers will find this quite comfortable. It's got Omron switches, another feature usually reserved for high-end gaming mice, and of course, as is the current trend, it's got RGB LED lighting as well, so you can set it to your desired colour or match your setup. Now, the GTX 1070 Ti also looks really smart, with a full metal backplate, that's to protect the circuit board. We've got 8GB of GDDR5 memory in there for high resolution gaming, and wing blade fans that keep the noise down when you're gaming and boost airflow to keep the card cool. It's actually one of the few cards that's made using Auto Extreme 100% robotic manufacturing. ASUS is one of the few to actually use this, and having it on an entry-level model for maximum quality is a really nice touch from ASUS. Both of these items I'm using for today's video, so the frame rate you see in the top left-hand corner for the 1070 Ti, that's a good representation of how this card is going to perform at 1440p resolution. If you want to find out more about these Cerberus products, then there's links down in the description to their relevant product pages. But let's get back to the destruction topic though, and I'm going to start with a Twitter conversation that opened up into a much wider discussion with the community the other night. We had various DICE developers, they were offering insights into how destruction has evolved as time's gone on, and just lots of community members getting involved and pitching in with their own thoughts and ideas. Now, one particular part of the conversation that I really picked up on was a section from Daniel Berlin, who is a design director at DICE Stockholm, and another developer, Matt Wagner, about why players might have the perception that Bad Company 2's destruction system was more advanced than what is currently available in Battlefield 1, and I want to talk about that. Stepping back to Bad Company 2, I think it's quite easy to see why people might think that destruction was superior to what we have today in Battlefield 1. Almost nothing was off limits in that game. If you had a grenade launcher or an RPG to fire, or you were sitting in a tank with a cannon on the front of it, then you could pretty much, with 90% accuracy, blast any object off the map and reduce houses to the ground. This created, I think, quite an aggressive playstyle for most players, with them running almost headfirst into combat, smashing walls apart and then firing their weapons the moment they entered a room so they could kill the player who was hiding away. You could totally demolish buildings, sometimes ones that even contained the MCOMs in the rush game mode, and I think that was some really emergent gameplay there. anything could really happen in those rounds of rush. Essentially, the game was a giant destructible sandbox where you could just level almost anything and completely change the flow of gameplay whilst you did so. Destroy all the trees on the first section of Valparaiso Rush, and the attackers would find it very hard to advance. If you knock down all the buildings in the town on Arica Harbour, and again the attackers would find it very difficult to make their way down the hill. You could affect gameplay massively with the destruction system in Bad Company 2, for better if you're running around having a great time destroying everything, or for worse when the gameplay breaks down and the game mode almost comes to a complete halt. This is a point that was picked up on by Daniel Berlin in his reply to the topic. He said the following: Bad Company 2 had the scripted collapse event on a house when X amount of walls were destroyed. We did not apply this in Battlefield 1's buildings, since we wanted to move away from events where the ruin/collapse looked the same every time you played. You can chip away at houses to a great extent in Battlefield 1, and on some houses to an even greater degree than in any previous Battlefield title. The intention is to make sure the ruined state of a town looks different every single time, and not just a collection of the same scripted collapsed houses. It's also important to mention that our destruction is significantly more detailed now, and it takes more time and effort to implement. And also, combined with the ground deformation system, or craters, that are way more impactful than in previous titles. Now here, with what Daniel said, I think this is a great overall reason as to why perhaps players believe destruction was better in Bad Company 2. The whole system was much newer, and the team were just starting to get to grips with what the Frostbite engine was really capable of. Bad Company 2 just cranked the destruction meter up to 11, creating an insane environment for players to have awesome fun and just destroy everything, but also to the detriment of gameplay and potentially a similar result every time the map was played. With almost everything on the map up for destruction, this could lead to one team simply leveling the environment and making it impossible for the other team to have a good round attacking back at them. In contrast, Battlefield 1, with its semi-destructive environments, let's say, with some objects remaining upstanding all the time, I think this creates a much more dynamic environment with no one-size-fits-all approach. It means with cover remaining that cannot be destroyed, there are more options open to you and your team about how to approach a situation. There are lots of different ways you could go, rather than just having all buildings destroyed and having to look over the top of them all the time. Now, I replied to Daniel about his comments on destruction. Here's what I said. I felt overall Battlefield 1 relied less on destruction as a gameplay mechanic in a good way, due to proper vaulting and pull-ups being implemented to the movement system. In previous games, cover would need to be destroyed to progress. In Battlefield 1, you can just jump over the cover. Now, Daniel replied, agreeing with this statement. Absolutely, it was a definite change of mindset in regards to how we build our assets and how we place them. In previous titles, a concrete wall could create a funnel, but in Battlefield 1, a player can high vault and leave said funnel at any time. It makes design more difficult. I think what we can really take from this discussion is that as technology has improved with higher fidelity assets and equipment being used by the DICE developers, we've seen a proper refinement in the approach to destruction in the titles that have been released since that point. Now, Battlefield 3, that took quite a departure from the mechanic and scaled it back severely. That might have been a knee-jerk reaction to what happened in Bad Company 2, where you could just destroy everything. Battlefield 4, that reintroduced the mechanic somewhat, but with a huge lean towards those set-piece moments, Levolution it was called, and Battlefield Hardline went down a very similar route. This mimicked much of what Bad Company 2 did, with the set-piece destruction of a house once somebody had destroyed most of the walls, but you didn't have to destroy any of the walls to make the set-piece happen in Battlefield 4 and Hardline, and of course, it was on a much larger scale. Now, players didn't really like that approach. It felt too much like simply pushing a button and watching it all happen, rather than the Bad Company 2 system, where you were doing all the destroying. With Battlefield 1, that appears to have taken the Bad Company 2 approach, but almost completely removed that set-piece aspect, where you can almost completely destroy things, but the house will still stand, offering cover to all players on the map and keeping gameplay moving. Bad Company 2 suffered from gameplay breakdown when most assets had been destroyed, and it seems developers tried to steer away from that in Battlefield 1. So even though we've established that Battlefield 1's system is almost a refined version of what we had in Bad Company 2, if I'm truly honest, I do still like both approaches of Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 1. Looking at the future, however, and the next Battlefield game that we'll call Battlefield 2018 here, I would hedge a bet on DICE just iterating from their position in Battlefield 1, rather than doing another big change, simply because its implementation in Battlefield 1 is a good all-round solution, as opposed to leaning too heavily one way or the other. But what do you guys think? Do you like the destruction in Battlefield 1, or are you a fan of the destruction in other games? Let me know down below in the comments section, and again, a massive thank you to ASUS for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel with their Cerberus GTX 1070 Ti and Fortus gaming mouse. Links are in the description to check those products out. But until next time, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.